Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you are and whatever you're doing, I hope you're having a fantastic day. With the Shadow of the Erdtree now less than a month away, I'm assuming, like me, a lot of people are getting back into Elden Ring, brushing up on their skills, reviewing their builds, and making sure that you're prepared for the inevitable difficulty spike of the DLC. If that sounds like you, then look no further than this very unique take on a weapon tier list, as I shall be counting down the top 10 weapons you should obtain, level up, and practice using to give you the best chance of beating the Shadow of the Erdtree. You've probably seen a bunch of these recently, and they're probably mostly based around what's the best damage output, what's the most efficient weapon to min-max, and which weapon has the highest DPS. But the problem is, lists like this don't take two very key factors into account. Firstly, the fact that you're probably out of practice and played like a bit of a scrub at the moment. No offense meant, me too. Which means some of these high skill cap weapons that are recommended are not going to be very good at the moment for you until you learn how to use them efficiently again with some more practice. And that's why all of the weapons that I'm going to talk about here on this list are all very easy to use. You won't see any geezer's wheels or ringed fingers here. I don't care how edgy people tell you they are and how much people try to make them work, they're just bad. Stop it. And I will even give you a quick rundown of the best moves to focus on with each weapon whilst you're getting to grips with the game again. And the second reason is simply wanting to have fun. This may be a hot take, but I'm going to assume that most gamers play to have fun and relax after the relentless bombardment of day-to-day reality, and you just want to forget about the stress of life and enjoy a game. So you want to find weapons that are powerful and easy to use, but still allow you to have a lot of fun so that you don't have to do hours of studying and sit a bloody exam just before you can get back into your favourite game. And yes, I do play Elden Ring to relax, don't judge me, you do too. With that explanation turned into a kind of rant out of the way, let's kick off the list with regular smithing stone weapons first, and then I will cover the best somber stone weapons in the second half of this video. Firstly, let me quickly reel off a few honourable mentions because I wanted to keep this to a top 5 smithing and a top 5 somber, and that was a lot harder than I originally anticipated because there is a hell of a lot of really good weapons in this game. So my 3 honourable mentions for smithing stone weapons to take into consideration is the Uchigatana, because it is just hands down the best starter weapon, and if you never ever want to change your weapon, you can just start as samurai and win the entire game with this weapon. My second honourable mention is the Zweihander. This is the lightest weapon in the Colossal Sword class, and you can literally just buy it from a merchant, specifically the isolated merchant in the very west of the Weeping Peninsula. So you can get this weapon super early in the game, and if you two-hand it, as you should, as the name suggests, then it has very low stat requirements as well. It also has a unique heavy poking attack, which it shares only with the Troll Knight's sword. It's got an excellent moveset and really good poise damage, so this is a solid early game weapon for anyone who wants to wield damn big swords. And my final honourable mention is the Antspur Rapier. Because this is one of the few weapons in the game with innate Scarlet Rot, and because it can be infused, this means it's possible to have so many status effects on this weapon at the same time. For instance, you can have Scarlet Rot, Blood Loss, and Poison all at once on this weapon. This is a really solid weapon. However, to make the absolute most out of it, it starts to get quite technical and you really need to build around it, which is why it didn't make it into the top 5 for this list, because as I said at the start, they're supposed to be easy to use and easy to fit into your build. So in no particular order, because they are all amazing, let's get on to my top 5. Firstly, this one will always have a special place in my heart because my chat on Twitch forced me to do a fist weapons only run, and that is when I found out about the awesome power of the Star Fist. I thought fist weapons were trash, but this proved me wrong time and time again. I'm gonna say this is the worst of the 5 smithing stone weapons I have for you today, purely because of the range. This is supposed to be for people that want easy weapons, people that are out of practice, and I believe it does have the shortest range of any weapon in the game, meaning sometimes you won't hit enemies even when you're stood right next to them, and it can be quite frustrating. It does require quite precise positioning, or you will miss the occasional attack, so it requires a bit more skill than the rest of the weapons on this list to use. But it's really easy to get. You literally just loot it on a body in Lanedale Royal Capital, meaning you can get it pretty early on in your playthrough. And with the right build, both the damage output and the bleed build-up are absolutely insane. Anyone here who is into challenge runs has probably seen many people no-hit the game specifically with this weapon because it is so damn powerful. Next up, we have got the Great Stars. When From Software added a second copy of this great hammer into the game, that is what gave me the idea to create our community's most beloved build, Mrs. Binky Bonk. I literally completed every single boss in the entire game by doing nothing but dual-wielding Great Stars and doing jumping heavy attacks. That is how easy and brain-dead this build can be if you want it to be. Literally just max strength, plus 10 both of these weapons, and you can just jumping attack everything to death. It staggers almost every enemy in the game in one shot, and even Malenia didn't stand a chance. The bleed build-up is insane, and both of these restore 1% health on hit, even if blocked. And this does stack, so if you're hitting with both of them at the same time, you're restoring 2% health on every single hit. So in between tougher fights, whilst you're just clearing up groups of smaller enemies, you don't even need to heal, you will just naturally be healing back to full health again. And being a smithing stone weapon, it can be infused with Ashes of War, it can be buffed with magic and consumables as well, so you can fit the Great Stars into literally any strength build you can think of. They are so versatile and so damn powerful. I should mention where you get both copies of the Great Stars. One is on a guarded carriage being towed by 2 trolls in the west of the Altus Plateau, and the other one is dropped by Magnus the Beast Claw when you invade and defeat him just to the south of the first one. Next up, we've got the Guardian's Sword Spear. This is dropped by farming Erdtree Guardians. The best place, I believe, is the minor Erdtree Church in the Lanedale outskirts. There are 6 here that you can just run around and kill until you get 2 of them if you want. If you make these sword spears keen affinity, they have the best dexterity scaling attack rating in the game. In fact, just as one example for you, if you have 99 dexterity with the keen affinity, it produces more attack rating than having both 99 dexterity and 99 strength and having a quality affinity. That is how insanely well the Guardian Sword Spear scales with dex. For such an easy to acquire weapon, it is absolutely insane with the damage output. And I won't dwell on it any longer than that because we have quite a few weapons to get through today. So all I will say is if this is the weapon you want to use going into the DLC, check out my build for the Lightning Guardian, where I utilize these along with some holy spells to get the absolute maximum you possibly can out of them. Next up, we have got the Godskin Peeler, probably my favourite twin blade in the game, due to one key fact. It is a smithing stone weapon with the weapon art of a somber stone weapon. Not many smithing stone weapons have cool weapon arts. They all tend to be things like stamp or spinning slash or impaling thrust, something like that. The Godskin Peeler, however, being a smithing stone weapon, still has the Black Flame Tornado. And if you didn't know, Black Flame deals percentage health damage, meaning it will kill the likes of the Elden Beast and the Fire Giant in roughly the same time it would kill a really minor boss such as Margit. So running this weapon on New Game Plus 3, 4, 5, whatever, is going to be amazing for you because things will still die very rapidly. And being a smithing stone weapon, it can be infused with Ashes of War and buffed with magic, meaning you can make some crazy ass builds out of this weapon. And this is dropped by the Godskin Apostle at Windmill Village. And finally, for the top 5 smithing stone weapons before we move into Sombers and boss weapons, we have got the Clayman's Harpoon. This is dropped by all Claymen in the Old Palace Ruins, Shifra River and Ainsel River. And what makes this so good is I believe it is the only dual damage type weapon in the game that can also be infused, meaning you can give this 3 damage types straight off the bat. And I'm not talking status effects, I'm talking actual damage. So it can do physical, magical, and lightning, or physical, fire, and magical. This is the most versatile smithing stone weapon, perhaps even the most versatile weapon in the entire game. Its scaling isn't amazing, but it's really good for hybrid builds if you want to do a little bit of everything, because its attack power is going to increase off of so many different scalings. This is absolutely perfect for strength intelligence hybrid builds, which is a real breath of fresh air for me because there are so few strength intelligence hybrid builds in the game. There's not really anything that synergizes with that, so if you do want to use this often overlooked build hybrid, this is the perfect weapon for you. It tends to usually be strength faith or dex intelligence, so seeing a weapon catering to strength intelligence is really, really nice. And hopefully that will be expanded on in the DLC and we'll get a bit more weapon variety. But truly, this is such a powerful weapon because if you want to focus more on intelligence, you could give it a magic infusion. If you want to focus more on faith, you could give it a flame art infusion. Possibilities are endless. This fits in with every single build that you could think of. Now that we've covered the top 5 smithing stone weapons, let's quickly take a look at the honourable mentions for the somber stone weapons. Then I'll give you a rundown of my top 5. The first honourable mention is going to surprise a lot of people that it isn't in the top 5, and that's the Hand of Malenia. There's another katana that I truly believe is better for the purposes of this list when we're talking about easy to use weapons. Even though the Hand of Malenia is undeniably very powerful and very stylish, the weapon art can leave you very vulnerable. And the other katana that I'll be talking about is so much safer whilst still being crazy powerful. Next up on the honourable mentions is the Starscourge Greatsword. I'm sorry, Radan, your sword is incredible, but for returning players and people getting to grips with the speed of combat in this game, it is just too slow and it can leave you open to far too many hits. This is definitely a contender for one of the best weapons in the game, but only once you have relearned the combat and you are comfortable with the speed of everything. Next up, we've got the Sword of Night and Flame. For a long time, one of my favourite weapons in the game, but the reason it hasn't made the top 5 is the stats are too varied. You are forced into a very hybrid build, and you are forced to be a very high level to make somewhat of a coherent build if you want anything else to synergize with this, because the stats it requires are so heavy and so all over the place. Also, until you've got a couple of hours of practice with it, the amount of times that you can get the Night and Flame stance confused is insane, and using the wrong one for a certain situation can be very detrimental. And finally, on the honourable mentions is the Dragon Halberd. I was so tempted to put it up there because it's very, very easy to get. It is dropped by the Dragonkin soldier in Shifa River, so you can get it super early on in the game, especially if you do the cheese where you just run around the back and hack at his left leg. And I do love this weapon. I love that the spinning slash skill will also apply additional lightning damage and frostbite buildup. It is really, really powerful. However, again, being a big, heavy weapon that you need to get up close and personal to use, for players brushing up on their skills, it can just be too risky compared to the 5 that I have coming up for you now. And now, in no particular order, let's take a look at the top 5 Somberstone weapons in the game. First up, we will start with the curved greatsword, the Bloodhound's Fang. You can get this very early on in the game by defeating Bloodhound Knight Darrowil in this Everjail here in Limgrave, and it's also the only one in the game where you can get help as well. If you start Blythe's questline, you can summon him to help you defeat Darrowil, and if you two-hand it, it means the stat requirements are also pretty low with 12 strength and 17 dex. It also has really decent innate blood loss buildup, and effectively, all you really need to do is just spam the Ash of War again and again and again to win the game. Not only does it have really high physical damage and bleed build-up, but during the first and second action of the Ash of War, you go invisible and you literally cannot be hit. Just like when you dodge roll, enemies' attacks will phase through you, and you stay invisible for a significant amount of time, so you're effectively invincible half the time you're fighting with this weapon. It is insanely powerful in so many situations. And even if you do happen to run out of FP and you need to use its normal moveset, most of the Bloodhound Fang's jumping attacks have a higher movement speed than the rest of the curved greatswords, so it's surprisingly fast as well. Both the two-handed jumping light and heavy attacks are significantly faster than the rest of the curved greatswords, and I suggest two-handing it pretty much all the time because it does insane amounts of damage. So the fact that it's pretty quick and nimble for being a curved greatsword just adds to how insanely powerful this weapon is. Next up, we have got the Blasphemous Blade. Like Radahn's sword, this is a very slow sword to use in melee, but unlike Radahn's sword, its Ash of War can be used from some distance. Taker's Flames, one of the most powerful Ashes of War in the game, healing 10% of your max HP plus a flat 150 HP on top for every single enemy it hits. This means you have effectively free infinite healing. Only downside is Taker's Flames, the Ash of War, does do pure fire damage and scales purely with faith. So it's a bit more niche than some of the other weapons on this list, and if enemies are heavily resistant to fire damage, it's not going to be very good. But this weapon skill has huge distance on it, and not only does it do a load of damage, but it also does a load of poise damage, outright knocking most enemies down before they even have a chance to move. And you can just stun lock most minor enemies to death before they even have chance to move. So if you are going for something like a strength faith build, having this for the majority of enemies and then swapping out to something like the Great Stars for enemies that are resistant to fire means you're not eating into your Somber stones, and you can easily and quickly max out both weapons and then be covered for pretty much every situation. Next up, the weapon that I said is better than the Hand of Malenia. I'm sure everybody already guessed it, this is the Moonveil. This is obtained by defeating the Magma Worm in Gale Tunnel in Caelid, and though it has the same sheath blade animation as most katanas, when you follow up with either a normal or a strong attack, the weapon skill Transient Moonlight will actually fire off waves of light, with the heavy attack hitting enemies significantly far away from you. The normal attack is great if you are surrounded up close and personal. It has a short range horizontal wave, and the strong attack fires a vertical long range wave that travels along the ground. Both the Wave of Light and your melee swipe deal damage independently, so if enemies are up close and personal, you will hit them twice for double damage. It also has inherent bleed buildup, and even without just spamming Transient Moonlight, if enemies do get close to you, katanas are some of the fastest, most powerful weapons in the game, giving them really high DPS and making them very, very easy to use. Also, who doesn't want to roleplay as a samurai? Katanas, specifically the Moonveil, are just some of the coolest weapons in Elden Ring, and definitely one of my absolute top weapons in the game. The penultimate weapon we'll be looking at is Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear. Its weapon skill, Blood Boon Ritual, is just so powerful. Not only will it hit everything around you in a pretty wide radius, it will even go through walls and objects. So you can use this to cheese so many enemies. Just lure an enemy to a wall, run to the other side of it and spam this, and you will be able to nullify most threats in the game. Also, when you cast the ritual, the buff will add fire damage to your weapon, and this buff lasts for 20 seconds, giving it roughly a 50-50 split between physical attack and fire damage at low levels. It also, again, has inherent blood loss buildup, and this, I believe, is the only weapon on this list that is really viable for an arcane build, because even though the strength and arcane scaling are the same, it actually scales better with arcane over strength, despite them both being a C rating at +10. And this weapon is obtained once you have handed in Mohg's Remembrance, the remembrance of the Bloodlord, to Enya at the Round Table. And finally, for the last weapon, again, it isn't necessarily number one. These are all so good, I couldn't think of a specific order to put them in. It's actually a tie between two very different weapons. I couldn't decide which one to put in, so I just decided to put them both in the list. Firstly, the Halo Scythe, dropped from scythe-wielding Lesser Cleanrot Knights near Commander O'Neill in Caelid. Some of the knights around here use spears, some of them use scythes, and obviously the scythe will only drop from the scythe-wielding enemies. The reason this has made it so high on a weapons tier list is its very unique skill, Miquella's Ring of Light. Also very fitting, as it seems as though Miquella is going to feature very heavily in the DLC. Your character swings the scythe from left to right, releasing a horizontal wheel or halo of light, which hovers in place for a moment before shooting forward. It deals holy damage and only scales with faith, and you can keep chaining these halos as long as you have FP and stamina. meaning at high levels you can spam so many of these rings of light and just obliterate targets before they get anywhere near you. Again, and this was completely by accident, this is yet another weapon that has bleed build-up. And just like with the Moonveil, if enemies are up close to you, both the weapon and the Ring of Light will deal damage when they hit the enemy, applying blood loss build-up, applying the physical damage of the weapon, and applying the holy damage of the Ash of War. So you've got a triple threat there. It is so powerful. To add a cherry on top of this already very tasty cake, it is one of the few weapons in the game that ignores block damage. It will actually ignore 50% of the damage negation from blocks and still do a really nice amount of damage even through blocking, with the heavy and charged attacks ignoring even more than that. So you are effectively still doing true damage if you are charging your attacks even when enemies are blocking. And finally, the other weapon that I wasn't sure whether to replace the Halo Scythe with, just because its weapon art is so ridiculously easy to use, is the Falling Star Beast Jaw. This is dropped from the full-grown Falling Star Beast right at the top of Mount Gelmir. It does have some really heavy stat requirements, so you are definitely best off two-handing it. And even though it has quite an even split between physical and magical damage for its regular attacks, the weapon skill, Gravity Bolt, which is pretty much all you will be using, scales far better with both strength and dex. So all you really need to do is hit the int requirement so you can use the weapon, and then you can pretty much be a quality build to get the most out of the damage of this weapon. It deals an extra 20% damage to gravity-type enemies, which is something that we might want to keep in mind for the DLC because we have absolutely no idea what new enemies we'll be facing. And again, like the Halo Scythe, as long as you have FP and stamina, you can just keep spamming Gravity Bolt again and again and again. It does ridiculous amounts of damage. Unfortunately, it used to do way more poise damage than it did, and it would just stun lock everything to death. That was significantly reduced, but the actual damage itself is so good that most of the time things can't get anywhere near you in the first place anyway, so that doesn't really matter. Being a colossal weapon, it's stupidly slow if you do need to resort to the actual attacks, so like the Starscourge Greatsword, that's why I considered not putting it in the list, but the weapon skill is so damn good that I couldn't leave it out. Anyway, my friends, that's it. That is the top 10 weapons that I advise you grab and level up and learn to some extent to prepare you for the DLC. You'll have a wide range of damage types so that you can exploit all of the new enemies' elemental weaknesses, and they're all pretty damn easy to use, so you should be able to crush everything that you encounter. Up until you face Malenia 2.0, that is. And with that, my friends, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.